Right, so if you remember a few weeks ago, there were some leaked M2 Max benchmarks, and they were disappointing because we were expecting 3nm chips with big upgrades. But what we saw with these benchmarks was essentially slightly better scores than the M1 Max, suggesting that yes, we're gonna stick with the same 5nm process. However, now we have another fresh benchmark for the M2 Max, and the scores are drastically different, so let's delve into it. So yeah, delving right in, the benchmarks are the following. The single core score is 2027, and the multi-core score is 14888. Now as a reminder, the previous M2 Max benchmark test gave us a single core of 1853 and a multi-core of 13855, so the multi-core is not that drastically different, but the single core has seen a major upgrades, and that could be pointing towards this chip actually being based on a new nanometer process. And further evidence that does suggest this could be the case is the clock speed, because this Mac that was tested has a frequency of 3.68 GHz instead of 3.54 GHz, and so yeah, clearly this is based on a new chip process. Since with the previous benchmark, the single core and the base frequency was basically the same as the M2 chip, and so now this being different with this benchmark, yeah, that means we could see 4nm or 3nm. Now personally, I think it's likely to be 4nm, not 3nm, because A, maybe that's not ready yet, but also these scores just aren't drastically better enough to be 3nm. And so yeah, 4nm like the A16 chip, that could make sense. And by the way, like the original benchmark, this machine also has 96 gigs of RAM, which is ludicrous, and is going to be one of the bigger upgrades for the M2 Max. Now, if you're wondering how these new benchmarks compare to the M1 Max, it should be 22% better, which is a nice improvement over the original benchmark that had a 14% improvement. However, of course, take all of this with a grain of salt because it's uncertain as to why these scores are so drastically different. I don't think it's likely Apple would be testing a 5nm and also a 4nm version of the M2 Max. And so yeah, maybe these benchmarks are fake. We'll have to see, but I'm hoping the upgrades are bigger than expected. Because of course, remember that everything else with this MacBook is going to be identical to the M1 variants. It all comes down to the performance upgrades, and so Apple needs to make huge strides. However, I would love to see other hardware changes, like HDMI 2.1 support, maybe new colors, maybe better battery life. But yeah, performance, that's the key thing Apple should focus on. Now, by the way, I do also want to say that because we're getting so many benchmarks for the M2 Max, that does suggest it's very likely we're going to see these MacBooks release in early 2023. And yeah, Apple often has a March event, so expect the new MacBooks to launch at that event. And we could also see the Mac Mini alongside it, though surprisingly there's been no benchmarks of the regular M2 Pro chip, just the M2 Max. And of course, we're not expecting the M2 Max in the Mac Mini, that's going to go in the Mac Studio instead. So maybe we see a new version of that. Oh, by the way, I nearly forgot, like the previous benchmark, we also see 12 CPU cores for the M2 Max, and I'm assuming the split's going to be 8 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. That's what Gurman said, and Apple giving us more efficiency cores is actually pretty nice because battery life on the 14-inch isn't that great, so improvements in that aspect is going to be appreciated. Anyways, let's delve into your questions. So Joe regarding the 15-inch MacBook Air says, don't go iPhone 14 Plus on us, and don't buy it after hyping it up. And fair enough, yes, I was completely wrong about the 14 Plus. I was expecting a regular plus-sized iPhone to do really well, but that was not the case. However, I do want to say that I was not expecting Apple to, of course, not give it a new chip, and not really give it any new features. And I think that's the bigger issue with the Plus, not the actual concept of a regular plus-sized iPhone. And so yes, as long as the price point's perfect, and Apple does not give us any considerable hardware downgrades, I think the 15-inch MacBook Air should be a popular machine. So at Johnny Hogg says, the greatest thing about a 15-inch Air will be the much better speakers, and a bigger battery, and of course a bigger display. And yes, I'm excited for the battery life with the 15-inch Air because we know how efficient the base M2 chips are, so of course putting that in a 15-inch MacBook with a massive battery inside should give this ridiculous endurance. And I believe the 16-inch right now has 21 hours of battery life with the M2 Pro and the M2 Max. So now imagine a similar sized MacBook with the base M2 chip that could maybe give us 25 hours of battery life or something a little below that. Either way, that should be amazing battery life. And yeah, I'm also looking forward to the better speakers. The speakers with the 13-inch already are pretty good, but now again with the larger size, the audio quality should be amazing. So William says, I think Apple's naming scheme for their M series chips are really rubbish, to be honest. Pro, Max, Ultra, Extreme all mean nothing to me. I get they do it for marketing, but they could simplify the lineup and have M2A, M2B, M2C, M2D and M2E, etc. It would make the lineup look more unified. So I do understand that, but as you say, it comes down to marketing. So of course, M2A, M2B, M2C, that does not sound as exciting as M2 Pro, M2 Max, M2 Ultra, etc. So I don't see Apple switching to letters. As convoluted as the current naming scheme is, it does sound more exciting, which of course helps Apple market their products. So at Goob Filmcast4239 says, I think Apple's actually beating their Mac sale projections and also anticipates even better sales numbers when compared with Windows PCs. Windows machines will, of course, outsell Macs in overall units, but Apple has been gaining market share against their Windows competition each year since 2020. While Apple dominates phones, tablets, wearables, there is still plenty of room left for macOS to snatch tons of market share from x86/Windows. Now yes, I completely agree with this. Apple has been on a winning streak with the Apple Silicon Macs, and it's definitely going to continue being the case. However, the best way Apple can capture most of the market, in my opinion, is of course to launch cheaper Macs. Specifically a sub $1,000 MacBook. Now of course I know that Apple sells a $1,000 MacBook Air, but what I'm imagining is a $700 or $800 MacBook that yes has some compromises, but ultimately gives you that performance of the M1 chip at a much lower price. And there has been rumours regarding a 12-inch MacBook revival, so maybe that is going to be that affordable MacBook. And I think many students and light users are going to appreciate that. So yeah, those are my thoughts guys, but of course, let me know your thoughts regarding this in the comments. Anyways, thank you for watching guys, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours. Check out the video above on details regarding the 2023 MacBook Pros, and on that note, see ya peeps.